Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensarling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly encouraged by what I hear in this debate. And what I hear from every speaker so far is concern about the underlying legislation, what its consequences may be. I have grave concerns over this underlying legislation. I believe that the legislation is mistitled. I do not believe this will create economic stability in our economy. Instead, I would suggest an alternative title. The Perpetual Bailout Act of 2010 might be one title I suggest. Another title would be ETARP, the Eternal Troubled Asset Relief Program, because I believe that the underlying legislation would ultimately enshrine us as a bailout nation. I believe it does give eternal life to the TARP program, which now, regardless of what it was, has now become a $700 billion revolving bailout fund that is used to advance the administration's political, economic, and social agenda. I believe it's based on a false premise. And that's really at the crux of this debate. Are there firms in our economy that are too big to fail, thus requiring infusions of government capital ultimately paid for by the taxpayer? I believe there are systemic events. I believe there is systemic risk. I believe there are policies enacted by this Congress that creates greater systemic risk, but I do not believe in a competitive marketplace that any one firm is too big to fail. And yet this is exactly the premise of the underlying legislation. Now, I know that we are told that ultimately the taxpayers won't have to foot the bill. Well, we know already taxpayers, through other bailout legislation between the Fed, between the Treasury, is already looking at an exposure of over $20 trillion. On top of the fact that we've already suffered the first $1 trillion deficit in our nation's history, an economic plan promoted by the administration, passed by the Congress, that'll triple the national debt in the next 10 years. Now, again, supposedly we are told that somehow, some way, the taxpayers ultimately won't be liable for this. But I fear that the same people who are telling us this are the same ones who told us that Fannie and Freddie were financially stable, that ultimately the taxpayers would not be forced to bail them out. I'm sure they believed it when they said it. It did not prove to be true. I also note that Medicare is going broke, Medicaid is going broke, Social Security will go broke. The National Flood Insurance Program was never supposed to need taxpayer rescue. It has needed it. And now we know that the FDIC, the insurance fund, is teetering with all, and a new line of credit has had to be opened with the Treasury. Frankly, I think you would have to suspend credibility to believe that ultimately taxpayers wouldn't be forced to pick up the bill. And then I'm very concerned when I see that essentially in this statute that we're giving the government the authority, again, to rescue some companies, liquidate other companies, the authority to pay off some creditors, not others, using taxpayer funds ultimately to keep some companies alive, others not, maybe operating for years on taxpayer life support, ultimately competing with healthy companies. It politicizes the economy. It means to be profitable in our economy, you no longer compete in the marketplace, you compete in the halls of Congress. You knock on the door of the Treasury in the White House. And certainly we saw that in Chrysler and GM, where we saw that unsecured creditors, read the UAW, managed to get 43 cents on the dollar, and 55% of the company, where senior secured creditors only got 29 cents on the dollar. A similar event happened at GM. A politically favored class ended up getting more money. We would start to politicize the process. And the incredible extension of power to the federal government to control a huge segment of the economy. And remember, this isn't just banking. If GM and Chrysler are found to be financial institutions, What Fortune 500 company in America won't be found to be a quote-unquote financial company in this economy? And there is a better way. I yield back to balance my time.